Want a satisfying, bright, crunchy, delicious, awesome holiday salad? That is a delicious and exciting main star of a meal for one, or a great side dish for a holiday table. And since this is the Not Following the Recipe series, we're gonna adapt it to make it work with what I have and to show you ideas of how to adapt it for yourself. I'm Rebecca, a non-diet Cooking for One dietitian. I'm here to help you make Cooking for One something to look forward to, something that is enjoyable and something delicious, while not wasting food and making it worth it for you. So I'm gonna look through the original recipe, and it has olive oil, apple cider vinegar, maple syrup, and salt. I'm gonna keep that. Those are pantry staples at my house, easy to have on hand, delicious together. The slaw itself for the salad is kale, apple, Brussels sprouts, green cabbage, and pomegranate, and then Parmesan cheese on top. And now, looking at this, Brussels sprouts and cabbage and kale, like that's a lot of stuff in this recipe. I feel like that's a little bit more than I normally would add, but I must have been trying to clean out my fridge, so I included all of these. They're all fantastically crunchy and delicious and are great, but maybe you just have kale, maybe you have kale and Brussels sprouts, maybe you just have Brussels sprouts. It'll work with all of these ideations. So today I'm going to be making this salad with kale and with Brussels sprouts because I wanted a couple different of these crunchy ingredients in there, and they didn't have any pomegranates at the store, and I wasn't in the mood to go to another store. And so this can be a great opportunity to show other like pops of fruity flavor that can go in to this salad and be just as delicious, just a little bit different. So I'm gonna be using dried cherries, but like dried cranberries would be great as well. I would go with a fruit that has a lot of flavor as opposed to like dried apples or something, because, well, we're already gonna have apples in it, but that tanginess, that tartness that you'll find in pomegranate, in cherries, in craisins, and dried cranberries is gonna be adding a lot of flavor and make this salad really delicious and something a little bit more special maybe, because fruit in a salad, although we've got apples and that other fruit is, you know, more than one, but I mean, the flavor here is fantastic. So let's get started and we'll kind of walk through how to make this. So I'm gonna start by showing you the produce that's gonna be chopped. You can do this first and then do the dressing, or you can do the dressing first and then start the vegetables. It matters 0%, whatever works for you. I'm just gonna start with my Brussels sprouts, and I have a knife over here. So to prepare Brussels sprouts, you're going to remove the outer layers. Since these aren't gonna be cooked, I do wanna make sure these look, I think these might've been really fresh. They look fantastic, so I'm even gonna keep those. And have that. This recipe, I realized, I don't know when I made it, a couple years ago, but it does make 2 servings. I need to change that. So for 1 serving of salad, I would recommend 1 to 2 Brussels sprouts. Unless you want to make extra for later, I just wouldn't recommend dressing it right away. All right, I've removed all the outer layers, and you can go through those after. This is just faster. Reducing food waste, actually, I keep reminding myself that's what I want to be doing. So I'm going to slice these up, and these are going to be just sliced thinly. So I'll flip that over. And you can slice them in a mandolin as well. It's just, they're so small that it's maybe gonna take as much time and effort as it would to slice in the mandolin as it would by hand, because you're gonna have to be so careful with that. And then another thing too, you can just slice them in half and then slice them in thin slices. That way it's a little bit more sturdy. Slice as thin as you can, because you're gonna be eating these raw, and raw Brussels sprouts, especially when they're shaved thin, are great. They're really delicious. You can also cut them or just go through a food processor. I would do this especially if you have a lot to chop. Maybe you are making this for a crowd, or you just want shaved Brussels sprouts for other things. Cold salads, you can heat them up, you can cook them. The options are endless there. So, not the absolute thinnest slices. It will take, you will be cutting a little bit slower, trying to get it thin. Keep reminding myself. That way you're not having just huge big bites of Brussels sprouts. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but as thin as you can make them is great. You can always flip over the ends so it's a little bit more sturdy. Okay, so my Brussels sprouts are all done. I'm gonna set these aside. We'll see how much I can fit on my cutting board. That's the nice thing about cooking for one, is that it doesn't take quite as much prep space because the amount that you're making is not as much. Next, I'm gonna be cutting my apples. So it's apple season, and as somebody who grew up in Washington, it's like the best part of the year. I love freshly picked local apples. And this is a Braeburn apple from, it's the best apple in the world in my book, from Pine Farms, Pine something in Utah. And can get them at the farmer's market, and seriously, they're the best apples ever. They're tart, sweet, really crunchy. Usually they've got so much flavor. Honestly, it's like when I can go get that box. It's the best. It's the best. It's so wonderful. So I'm just slicing this apple as thinly as I can, trying to go a little bit slower, and it's getting through that skin. And let's see, so I'm gonna slice it thin, and then I'm also gonna slice it again. So we've got thin little matchsticks. You can use a mandolin for this as well. Maybe that would be a little bit smarter for me, but you know, that's not something that everybody has, and a knife and a cutting board are much easier to wash than a mandolin. As far as apples go, use your favorite kind of apple. I would recommend something that's crispy, that's crisp, and tart sweet is delicious with the maple syrup and all the other ingredients in the salad, but stick with what you really like. If you like something a little sweeter, like a Fuji or something, that's great. Again, this is like the one recipe I'm using this apple for that's not just plain eating, because there's only so many I can get every year, and they're best for eating. So lucky recipe. You can sometimes flip it over to get a thinner slice. Just be very careful with your fingers. This apple itself isn't feeling quite as crisp. As they usually are. Oh, but the flavor is so good. This is a great use of an apple. Even if they feel kind of crisp, they're not always the most crisp on the outside, and that's just when you grow something, that it's not all perfect or exactly what you want. But a salad or something like this is a great way to use up those apples or that produce or something that's not exactly like you'd want to be eating by itself. Or if it's something like kale, for example, that would be cooking it as opposed to eating it raw. All right. Like I said, this is like 2 servings, maybe 4, kind of depending on how much salad you want. I think that's one of the hard things about cooking for one and finding recipes online. You get 1 serving, and it could be a half a serving for you. It could be 2 servings for you, just depending on your appetite and other factors too. And so it's hard to know how much you're gonna wanna eat. Okay, so back to the kale. I'm just taking, what I like to do actually is just slide off. There are pieces of the kale that weren't already kind of broken off, so the sliding wasn't gonna work that well. But you don't wanna eat this really hard, fibrous kind of backbone or whatever of the kale. So I'm removing these. There's a squirrel burying an apple or something in my yard. Okay, so first step with the kale. I like fresh kale, but it's often just so crunchy and a little bitter. And so massaging it makes the biggest difference. You're gonna add some salt and just like rub it together. This is not a science. Nothing super particular. You just want to break up these, you just want to be able to break up the cells a little bit to make it softer, which improves like the flavor and the texture a lot for eating raw. If you're cooking it, you don't need to do this. I just would add some sort of seasoning to kind of cut that bitterness. But I find this to be super helpful, and it makes the kale much more delicious. I'm a kale lover, but I don't love kale that hasn't been massaged in some way. And you, as you could tell, I just massaged it for like a minute, if that. You don't have to do it for a super long time. And then I'm just gonna cut into bite-sized pieces. I'm a person who likes smaller pieces of whatever it is that I'm eating. And so if it's in a salad, I want it to be smaller. That's just me, personal. You could do whatever works for you. I'm just gonna kind of make sure that I don't have any huge, big pieces. And then it's all ripped up well. This is super scientific. Okay, the produce is ready to go in the salad. Now I'm gonna make the salad dressing, and I would highly recommend making the salad dressing in the bowl that you're gonna mix it all together in. It's gonna save you dishes, a little bit of effort, kind of, and it works well, especially when you're making smaller batches that way. That is why I was making and keeping everything that I cut so far on the cutting board, as opposed to moving it to the bowl. That way you can make the dressing as is, keep it all together, and then add the salad to it. And another thing too to keep in mind, always choose one bigger size of bowl than you think you're gonna need, because you're gonna save yourself a dish. It might feel like you're making a little salad in a big bowl. That's easier to deal with than making a big salad in a little bowl. Done that way too many times to continue to make that mistake, okay? Now I'm going to be making my salad dressing. Salad dressings are things that I make that I do want to make sure I'm following the recipe. So I'm looking over here to find my recipe. So I've got a tablespoon of olive oil. So I'm gonna start with that. I find it hard to find that balance of like the tangy vinegar, whatever part to the salad, and the olive oil. So I like to just use what has already been determined instead of have to adapt it afterward. And then I've got a half a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar. Traditionally, vinaigrettes are 3 parts oil to 1 part vinegar or whatever. I like more half and half-ish, or 2 to 1 in this case, I guess, because I just like things really tangy, but you can adapt as you need. And then half a teaspoon of maple syrup for some sweetener, to add some sweetness and flavor. Maple syrup's great in a lot of things, and just a pinch of salt. I'm gonna mix this up with a fork. Since it doesn't have mustard, although you can add mustard to it, you can add like Dijon mustard to it if you want, and that's gonna help combine or emulsify the oil and vinegar, and so they'll stay together easier. But we're gonna be dressing the salad pretty much right now, so it doesn't matter as much. And another thing too, I misread my recipe, but I thought that I was doing apple cider vinegar and maple syrup in here. I would do the vinegar first because it's gonna come out easily, and then add the syrup afterward because it's gonna leave it's stickier. Now is time to add the vegetables to it. Ooh, this kale is so nice. And then the apples and Brussels sprouts, they're getting everywhere. Now that I've added the produce to the salad dressing, I'm going to be adding like the crunchy and other toppings to it. The recipe originally calls for pomegranate seeds or pomegranate arils. I think that's how you say it. I feel like I write it a lot more than say it. Let me know if I'm pronouncing it wrong. So the pomegranate and also Parmesan cheese. I have some Gruyere cheese that I want to use up, and I also couldn't find a pomegranate at the store. So I'm going to be using tart dried cherries, which are absolutely delicious, so great. And I'm going to be doing those instead of pomegranate seeds. So one final note about this salad, if you're going to be making extra for later, only assemble or dress the salad that you're going to eat in the moment as opposed to saving it for later. These crunchy, heartier, I guess, vegetables will hold the dressing a little bit better than like romaine lettuce, for example, but this is not one that you want to just let sit and marinate for a couple of days. I would keep the produce part and the dressing and the toppings all separate until about 15 minutes before you serve it. Some recipes are great to have sit out for a little bit. This is not one of those recipes. You can let it sit and kind of like the flavors meld or marinate together for like 15 minutes, but you can just serve it right away. All right, so instead of the pomegranate seeds or arils, is that how you pronounce it? I think so. I'm adding chopped dried cherries, and these are tart cherries, which are gonna give you a really great and kind of similar flavor to the pomegranate. And you can leave them whole, but again, I think since these are chopped fine, I like the smaller pieces. Might want to add more to that, but we'll see. I'm also going to grate, so this recipe calls for Parmesan cheese, but I've got some Gruyere cheese that I want to use up, that I've been trying to use up, and this will be good as well. It's kind of has a, I feel like the flavor is a mix between a sharp cheddar and Parmesan cheese maybe. I think it's dried out, but it's a little bit hard like a Parmesan is, but the flavor will be great with this recipe. And then finally, I'm adding some chopped pecans. You can use any kind of chopped nuts. Again, kind of keep the sizes similar. I would do chopped as opposed to whole. And that is it for this salad. Make sure that the dressing is enough. This is seeming to be kind of big. Maybe this recipe needs to be reworked. Whoops. But I think you might want a little bit more dressing for this amount of vegetables and things in it. I think it's okay. Personal preference. Maybe you want more of that olive oil or tangy flavor. Yeah, I don't think it needs extra dressing. Let me try it. Yeah, it does. So I just added a little bit of apple cider vinegar to it. I think my vegetable to dressing proportion was a little bit different than original. A little more oil. This recipe needs a little bit of a retest. It's not bad, but it's a little off. I think it needs some mustard, and it's better to add that to the dressing first than the salad so it can get incorporated more easily. But we're working with what we have. Ooh, I think that was all the Dijon. Okay, yeah, that needed more. Hopefully this is gonna be better. A little bit more salt. It's not too sweet, so I'm not gonna add any more maple syrup to it. I think this is good, and I think it needs a tiny bit more apple cider vinegar. You can use tongs or just kind of dump it out. Again, the least number of dishes possible, kind of the better it is. My salad is done. I'm just gonna add a couple more toppings because this is kind of the fun bit on top. And it adds lots of flavor and different textures. And I'm gonna finish off with some cheese. Just trying to be careful because it is a smaller amount. And it's dried out to be kind of a hard cheese, so it takes a lot of pressure. Okay, da 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 da. All right, so now that we've seen another way to make this salad other than the original way, which honestly like needs a little bit of adapting, that dressing wasn't quite right. I need to test that again. By the time that this is up, the better dressing recipe will be on the website, I promise. So now I want to share a couple of ideas of how you can adapt the salad to make it work for you. Of course, the toppings and dressing additions are kind of endless, but here's just a couple ideas to get started. As far as dressing goes, I added some mustard to it, and I like that, but I think I would go in like more of a tangy direction, and a lot of times it's lemon. The apple cider vinegar is good in this. I really like it. I just feel like it needs a little bit more brightness, especially comparing it to like what I kind of was expecting. What I'm doing here is to kind of show and display how to adapt recipes to make them work for you. And not only that, but like we each have different taste preferences. So I might like things really tangy and you might not. And so what are you gonna do to make a tangy recipe good for you? Maybe add something sweet, maybe add more olive oil, especially with this dressing. So a couple of other additions or kind of substitutions that you can make to the salad itself. So this recipe calls for kale and Brussels sprouts and cabbage and apples. That's a lot of different things. You can just stick with the kale and the apples, just kale and Brussels sprouts or Brussels sprouts and cabbage. I mean, whatever you have that works. I would recommend doing like apples or even a pear would be good. The texture is gonna be really different than an apple, but it's gonna add kind of that sweetness to it that's really great and feel more fall wintry for that topping. So that I would kind of stick in that realm, and also like broccoli and cauliflower and vegetables in that line that are very crunchy, pretty mild. Those will go well in this salad as well. Now, as far as toppings go, again, started out with pomegranate and Parmesan cheese. I adapted it to tart dried cherries, pecans, and Gruyere cheese. But you could do any kind of mixed nuts. You can do pomegranate, you can do dried cranberries. I wouldn't do fresh cranberries. That flavor, like that's gonna be way too tart, most likely. You could skip those if you don't have any of those, but I will say kind of that brightness is really nice. And maybe that's part of why this tasted different than what I remembered, is that I like that tang, that punch, and those pomegranates are gonna give it more that than the cherry, like the dried cherries are, because when you bite into that pomegranate, you get juice out of it. These dried cherries, delicious and tart, but there's no juice there. It's been all dried out. So those are a couple ideas as far as substitutions go, and so hopefully that'll get you started in making this salad and adapting it to meet your own needs. And then finally, I also want to go over serving options. The salad is delicious and great, but it is vegetables, a little bit of nuts, and cheese, and that's not gonna be that satisfying for a meal. So I would recommend serving that with maybe like an Instant Pot steamed fish. I've got this great, delicious, and easy fish recipe that you can make in an Instant Pot, and you just steam it. You can do it from frozen, so you don't have to plan ahead and like defrost your fish. That's the one thing I never remembered to do, is defrost meat. So that's an option. You can also do like a panko crusted chicken. That is delicious and super easy. Also like a panko crusted tofu. instead of adding like the seasonings or like the sauces that are in that recipe, you could do just a panko crusted tofu, which I also have a recipe for. Those are a couple just simple places to get started with other foods to fill this up. That doesn't add any sort of like starch or carb to it, so I would recommend like having some crusty bread with it. That's always a go-to and very easy. Pasta, potatoes, mashed potatoes can feel more like a holiday type of a meal. There are lots of options for that. So those are a couple of ideas just to like round out this dish. And one thing that I always keep in mind when I'm cooking, but want to make sure that I'm like sharing that instead of just having it in my head. But when it comes to cooking for one, I find a really helpful way of approaching cooking is to focus on like one part of your meal as being something with a lot of flavor. It could be the whole meal, everything like one pot or all made together, or it can be different components. So it could be a protein that's got a lot of flavor and intention, and then like really simple other sides. Or the salad as example. I wouldn't go and put a lot of effort into the other dish or like whatever else I'm eating with it. I'm just gonna make it as easy as possible. So that could look like the fish that I mentioned, that chicken, whatever else. I also, how I had lunch today, originally I thought, okay, I'm gonna like do this video, have this, finish the salad afterward. Things had happened before. It was gonna be too late to eat. It's probably like 2:30 or 3. It's 3 o'clock already. That's too late for me to have my lunch. And so I ate beforehand and then like gonna finish off with eating this salad. And I just did like frozen chicken tenders that I cooked in the air fryer, and that's super easy. So it doesn't have to be anything super fancy, or it can look a million different ways, is what I'm saying. So keep that in mind as you're kind of planning for this. Focus on this as your intention and also like the effort that you're putting towards it, and then whatever you're serving with, leftovers, like mac and cheese, something that you're just gonna like easily cook, throw on wherever it's cooking, and then let that do the work. So that's kind of my tip for cooking for one. Okay, yay, finally. I feel like that was a lot of things to talk about. So I've got my salad here and a fork. I kind of tested it to make sure the proportions were good. Let's see how it actually ends up. It's really chewy, crunchy, the Brussels sprouts. I really like this. I'm a tangy fan. How many times can I say tangy in this video? A lot. That is one big difference, I think, between the original pomegranate to the dried cherries. While they are tangy, you don't notice or have the tangy experience outside of eating them themselves. So I would bump this up and add, I feel like I added, did you see that food fall on my mouth? I'm sorry. I feel like I added like 3 or 4 times the amount of apple cider vinegar. I think I would go with like lemon on this to up the tanginess, but that's just me. I mean, you might think this is great as is, or want to add something else to it, and that's fine too. But I really like the lots of different textures here. The dried cherries add a different texture, kind of a soft, chewy texture. And the kale that had been massaged is really good in this. It's like not too crunchy. You're really getting the crunchiness from the Brussels sprouts. And if you can, or if you want to, a mandolin would be great because it's gonna help get those real thin slices, or a food processor would work as well. But this is super good, super easy. Even if you kind of mess up the dressing to begin with like I did, there's always room to adapt it and to make it work. You might get a bite full of mustard or something else that you add to it, but stir it up really well and it should incorporate well. So many ways to enjoy this salad. You might need to make additional kind of substitutions to make it work for your flavor preferences, but super delicious, easy to have for a meal for one, or to bring as a side dish for a holiday party, a winter party, a dinner party, whatever it is. lots of ways to enjoy this. So I hope that this was helpful, interesting, fun to kind of see me mess up and see how we deal with that, because that's what cooking is like things not working exactly as we want them to, and then making the adaptations afterward. So thanks so much for watching, but before I head out, before we're done with this, I'm curious, what are your favorite holiday side dishes? Whatever holidays that you're celebrating in the winter months, what are your kind of favorites? I'm a huge fan of kale and Brussels sprout salads. My mom makes like a number of salads with those in them, and they're all so good. Also, a huge mashed potato fan here. So I'm curious what your favorite like holiday side dishes are with whatever holidays that you're celebrating, or favorite foods to eat in the winter. Thanks again for watching. Hit the subscribe button, like this video. Hopefully this was really helpful, or parts of it were helpful. The more subscribes and likes we can get, the more people this can reach. I know a lot of us who cook for one haven't really ever thought of it being different, but it really is so different than cooking for more people than one, and it can be really enjoyable and great and easier than we make it out to be. And honestly, like, we kind of need to learn that for ourselves, and I'm here to help teach that. So share away, share any comments that you have, whether it's your favorite side dish, or if you have any questions about any of this, I would love to answer those and to help you out. And also maybe that would inspire another video to answer those questions too. So again, thank you so much. I'm in a rambling mode. I'm just gonna stop, subscribe, like, blah, 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 all of those things. And thanks for watching.